Our roundup of queen's pawn systems whereby white avoids the queen's gambit, and so we naturally come to the system which is kind of a hybrid of the Torre attack, where white plays bishop g5, specifically after both white and black play d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6. This is a rather ineffectual move order for white. I think white's hoping to get some sort of Trompovsky position where he can play bishop takes f6 in peace, or just build up slowly with e3, c3, knight be2 in the realm of the Torre attack. Well, we're not going to let him, and I believe that the most accurate move order here is knight e4, and if white goes bishop h4 in this position, we'll see bishop f4 in the next game, then black breaks free with the immediate c5. I believe this is the move order which solves all of black's problems against this kind of Torre hybrid. Now, the first point to note, white's bishop has left the queen side, therefore black immediately introduces the black idea of queen b6, putting pressure on b2. And we're going to take a look at a game now between Jan Timman and Luc van Wely, two of Holland's best ever players, and this game was played in Dordrecht in the year 2000. It's not the world's greatest game, not a game that Timman will be proud of, but it shows you how effective this method is for black. And now in this game, Timman played e3, which is natural enough. Now, in a subsequent game that Timman played against Shirov in Vikensay 2001, there Timman played d takes c5. But it's unlikely that this surrendering of the centre is going to give him anything at all, and Shirov developed fluidly with knight c6, and then after e3 he played g6. Black finds another way to bombard the white queen side. Bishop will be very effective on g7, and I think much more effective than the bishop on h4. White went knight bd2, and now black went knight takes c5 in the Shirov game. Knight b3, and now another interesting move, bishop g7. And the point of that is that if he takes on c5, then queen a5 check, regaining the piece with an excellent Grunfeld-like position. So going back, Timman played this move so typical of these queen's pawn systems, c3. White is just inviting black to bash his head against a brick wall, trying to drain all the life out of black's position by playing in this way. Shirov played knight e4, bishop d3 castles, and now Timman went in for a rather tedious series of exchanges. He took on e4, he took on d8, knight fd4. Looks like white is playing for a draw. But no, knight e5. Very good. Why should black take on d4 in this position? Knight e5 is very, very good. And after bishop takes e7, rook e8, bishop a3, in came Shirov's knight to d3, king e2 and then b6. Bishop a6 is coming. This is an excellent position for black with full compensation. And black went on to win this game in 65 moves. So going back to c5, Timman played e3 against van Wely, and black immediately executed his plan with queen b6. The nice thing about this plan from black's perspective, it's pretty easy to remember, and that advantage cannot be underestimated, especially at club level. So white played queen c1. I mean, b3 is a pretty ugly move, and now black moved fluidly in with c takes d4 and then bishop g4. This is another advantage, not having played e6 early on in the opening gives you as black, and bishop g4 contains the pointed idea of bishop takes f3. So white played bishop e2, and now van Wely played knight c6. Well, obviously bishop takes f3 was a move. I think van Wely didn't do this because he thought, well, why should I give Timman anything at all in this position? I've got the better position with black after about 8 moves in this opening. Why should I give him anything? I mean, I think white can drum up some compensation for the pawn here after a move like rook d1. Van Wely was thinking to himself, well, my position's so good, all I need to do is to continue with natural moves and I'm going to be better. And that's how it panned out. White plays c3, black played rook c8. All good moves in a row. Now the threat of bishop takes f3 and knight takes d4 is strong. White's queen is in precisely the wrong place. This is a model demonstration of how to play against a white queen on c1. Timman castled, took on f3. Well, I mean, white really doesn't want to take back with the pawn in this position. He took back with the bishop. Knight takes d4, an absolutely crunching move. knight f5. What is white to play? He's got no compensation for the pawn in this position whatsoever. Timon tried the tactical move bishop g4, g6, and now it seems to me that white almost gave up hope in this position after the mistaken knight to d2. And I think literally his only try to keep on the board here is just to play something like takes on f5 and then queen to c2. If he goes knight d2, we're going to see a similar tactic to the game. Queen c2, there's a point to that. Well, now rook g8 is good, and if knight d2 here, I think we just keep it simple with black. We just take on d2 and then go queen h6. Double attack on queen at d2, bishop h4. He's got a swap. White can put his pieces in the middle, threatening rook takes d5, but king d7. And we see this position, black's just a pawn up for nothing, with the further plan of minority attacking on the queen side with b5 and a5 and then b4. So it's not as if black doesn't have an active plan in this position either. I mean, I think he's just a pawn up with a clearly better position. So going back to Timon versus Van Wely, white gave up hope and he ran straight into bishop h6. That is just a winning move, I think. A winning move. Too many pieces attacked, and after rook d1 he went knight takes h4, and white resigned this position. So just to summarise, initially this is not an especially effective Torre move order. It can be met successfully with knight e4. We've seen what happens after bishop h4. The bishop leaves c1 h6 diagonal. He can't defend the queen side anymore. c5 threatening queen b6 is just a very good move. You might be getting slightly worried that there are many alternatives to the Queen's Gambit from white's perspective, and black has to learn a lot if he wants to play d5. But it's like that with any opening, and most of the responses I'm suggesting from black's point of view are actually quite logical. We now come to an opening which could be very popular at club level, and that is the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit, where white plays e4. D takes e4, knight c3, knight f6, and now the characteristic move is f3. This is popular among attacking players and is often used by really strong players as a training ground to improve their tactics. White sacrifices a pawn at a very early stage. He gets all his pieces flowing. He gets the ability to castle quickly. Basically, he gets something like 5 or 6 free moves for a pawn. Nevertheless, there's no need to panic with black, and I believe that black should take this pawn. It's essentially an unsound gambit if you play carefully. Now, white has two choices here, but in 95% of the games, let's say, white takes with the knight. If he takes with the queen, which is the rider gambit, then black should display no fear and take on d4. This is basically 2 pawns down for not very much, and after queen g4, queen f2, black can play either e5 in this position, which is a good move, or even c6. You won't get that very often. Far more common is knight takes f3, and that's what I'm going to focus on here. After which I think there are many good moves for black, but I like c6. This is the Ziegler defence. I've commented on this method of play many times in the past. I think it's very effective. Black is just going to basically play a kind of Caro-Kann or Slav position. He's going to play his bishop from c8 out to g4 or f5. He's going to play e6, knight bd7. It's a very easy development plan to adopt. And there are many games from recent practice, not at a very high level, but I'm going to show you one from the Marseille Open, played in December 2011, between Benoist Busson, a French player graded 2016, and a guy called Momchil Nikolov, who's grades 2570, so presumably a grandmaster. And it's just interesting to see the pragmatic way a grandmaster deals with this gambit. You know, he just sets up a structure which is almost fireproof, takes no risks, and invites white to display compensation for the pawn. Well, in this game, Busson, basically a club player with nothing to lose. I mean, this is the right approach, I guess, when you're playing a grandmaster. You might as well go for it. He plays his bishop out to c4, and that is the mainline move. White has other moves here. He can play bishop d3. Well, after that, bishop f5 has been prevented, so bishop g4 would be a good move now. And however white plays in this position, he doesn't get any compensation for the pawn. For instance, if he goes h3, again, be bold, just take on d4. There's nothing wrong with your position. You can play e6, you can play knight bd7. If he goes bishop e3, well, there are all sorts of moves available, one of which is something like queen h4 check, and then queen b4. White castle on the queen side, knight bd7. White has nothing for his pawns in this position. Going back to c6, bishop d3, bishop g4. This has been played quite a few times, and in most of the games white has castled. Now we go e6, bishop e3, let's say. White's got the problem of having to defend his d pawn there. You know, he can't just play cavalier moves like queen e1. We just take the pawn off. Again, it's 2 pawns. So bishop e3, then we go something like knight bd7, queen e1. Again, take the knight, why not? Bishop d6. We're reaching a position where white has something for the pawn, but not enough. That is the basic premise of black's entire setup. Going back to c6, the opening move, well, you know, white can try moves like bishop g5 here, angling to play, let's say, queen d2 and castles on the queen side. Black can play bishop f5. This is a nice, comfortable move, and if white goes through with his so-called threat of doubling the pawns, I just don't see the compensation. This is a Caro-Kann variation where white has given up a pawn for nothing. Okay, black's pawn is doubled, but it's extra, and black has 2 bishops. So this is why attention is focused on primarily bishop c4 as the main line. And now the nice easy move for black is bishop to f5. Note, not bishop g4 in this position. That would be a serious mistake due to the crushing blow bishop takes f7 check. And white regains his pawn. Not only that, he displaces the black king. So bishop f5, and now in this game Buisson played his knight to e5, which again is considered as the main line. There was another game played in France in 2011 between De Crop and Van der Van, low-rated players to be sure, but after castles e6, white played bishop g5. This is just typical Blackmar-Diemer Gambit play, settling for completing development. These are the 3 moves I was referring to earlier. But it looks to me, it just looks like a normal position where white is a pawn down. You know, black's structure is fireproof here, and I think he's got 2 good moves. He can play h6 in this position, and if bishop f4, he can even boldly castle, allowing white to sacrifice. I mean, this sort of thing looks very scary at club level, or it might look very scary in an internet 1-minute game, but black can just play knight g4 after calm reflection, and then king g7, and white's attack is beaten back. So white just can't go in for the caveman approach here. Castles is also a good move. That was played in the game De Crop versus Van der Van. White played knight h4. That's a typical approach, coming in and taking off the bishop. Now he goes rook f3. But it takes ages for white to reroute these pieces to the h-file. Something like this is his plan. Rook h3, queen f4 and queen h4. Knight b6 was played. Bishop b3 and now c5. Interrupting the plan. Putting pressure on d4 before white gets a chance to play queen f4. So after d takes c5, the queens came off and black went on to win. Simple as that. So white is not exactly flushed with choice in this position. That's why knight e5 has been played and now castles. And with that move, white sets up the threat of rook takes f5. So black retreats with bishop g6, and again this has come to be considered as the best move. And now white has tried a whole series of moves here, but none of them convinced me. An old thought was to play g4, just crazily going after f7. Knight bd7 neutralises comfortably if g5 we're taking on e5. So there was an old game of Bricard, a French IM, where white took on g6, and now white went g5. Black played an excellent move now, queen to c7. Bishop f4 was played, protecting h2. Black played bishop d6, and suddenly white was in trouble. For instance, if he goes takes on d6, excuse me, now rook f2, we go knight h7, and if knight e4, we go queen e7, and if queen g4, we go knight b6, bishop b3, knight d5. Black is on the verge of consolidation. And note that white can't play rook e1 in this position, rook f1, excuse me, because of knight e3. Just going back to this Bricard game, White took on f6, black took on f4, white took on g7, and bishop e3 just finished the game there and then. The bishop moves out of the way to allow the black queen to come down and land a decisive blow on h2. So going back to our main line, that's not so great. I think you can expect, if you get this position, some move like bishop g5, and then just get on with setting up the basic structure with bishop e7 and knight bd7. This was all played in a game from Edinburgh, Scotland in 2011 between Will and Kynoch. White took on g6. Black opened up the file, rook a1. But there's just not enough for a pawn in this position, I'm sorry, there really isn't. Going back to bishop g6 one more time, white can try bishop e3. Another move fitting into the category of natural development. This was played in the game Larter versus Robinson, played in England in 2011, and now there white played queen f3, knight bd7 again, takes, knight e4. White actually isn't threatening anything here, and black is better, and again went on to win. Let's just see how this went. Black played knight b6 attacking the bishop. He played his knight round to d5. White went bishop d2, and now black called white's bluff by taking on e4. And the whole point of this move is that white can't take on f7. Well, he can, but the attack is quite unsound. It turns out that black can take everything. Queen takes e6, king c7, rook f7. This is about the best that white can do. Well, we just take on b3. That knight's gone on a spree, taking off all of black's pieces, white's pieces en route. And queen d6 just completes the consolidation. So, going back to the game itself of Busson versus Nikolov, white really doesn't have anything concrete by which he can demonstrate total compensation for the pawn. As I said at the outset, to me it just looks like the type of situation where black's structure is fireproof and white has nothing for the pawn. Busson in the game played a kind of miserable looking move. He played knight e2. I mean, you do not play the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit to try moves like that. But I suppose the motivation is he wants to play the knight up to f4, which would maybe introduce ideas of a sacrifice on e6. Unfortunately for white, this plan is too slow, and knight bd7 interrupts it. White took on g6. He played knight f4, getting on with the plan, and now black called the bluff with bishop d6. And if white doesn't go in for something like this, bishop takes e6, then really the whole idea of rerouting that knight to f4 is meaningless. So that's what Busson did. I mean, full credit to the guy here. He's 500 ELO points, 550 points lower than his opponent, so he may as well go for it. Knight takes e6. Unfortunately, you know, the problem for white is that his own king is not exactly safe. So Nikolov played bishop takes h2 check. King h1, a horrible looking move, but king f2 isn't much better either. Black would play queen e7, again as per the game. Queen e7 was played, and now what is white going to play? He's got this impressive looking knight, but nothing to do with it. And if white goes rook e1, well, the simplest move available is just bishop g3, discovered check, winning the rook. So queen e2 was played, knight h5, again with lethal threats on g3, rook f3, in he comes, takes, check, king g1, and now another crusher from Russia, rook h1 check, and Busson resigned. He must take, queen h4 check, king g1, queen h2 check, queen h1 mate. That would be the finish. So I think you can confidently meet the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit with the Ziegler defence. That's c6. The idea is to develop this bishop fluently and then to set up a solid position with e6, knight bd7, bishop e7 or bishop d6, and invite white to show his compensation, which frankly I don't think exists.